Great. Thanks, Tinas. Yeah. So today, a little bit of a less technical topic, but one that I'm quite interested in. So I want to talk to you guys about high-performing teams today, and specifically focus a little bit around blue teams. I guess as a little bit of a background, I spent the first 7 years of my career at PwC, focusing on pen testing and stuff. In 2020, I decided let me shift away from consulting, and I joined FNB as a threat hunter, helping build out their threat hunting and security intelligence side. And in 2022, I thought to myself, no, I need to get back into the red teaming and get to the epitome of this. So look towards the best red team consulting company that I could find, and managed to get in. And I've been collecting KLB TGT hashes ever since. Yeah, so then I guess just a couple of things from this is obviously the first one. It looks like I seem to only work for companies that are made up of 3-letter acronyms. So unfortunate if you don't have one of those. And secondly, I think just from my background, I've got a lot of experience working with for blue teams. So I think that gives me a pretty good platform to stand on when we're talking around high-performing blue teams today. All right, so when we talk about high-performing blue teams, what do we think about? The one that first comes into my head prior to this weekend's rugby match is the Springbok rugby team. They're a fantastic side, back-to-back World Cup winners. We really can't argue with the fact that whatever's Rusty's done has taken this team to the top and got them there. But today, I think since we're all into cybersecurity, maybe this isn't the best sport to analogize. And I think maybe there's one that could be a bit more appropriate. So one that's sponsored by sort of these kind of names that you're all probably quite familiar with in some way or form. And so I'd like to ask you, anyone have a clue as to the sport that I'm going to try and analogize today? F1. There we go. Thank you. So we've got some audience members that'll enjoy the talk. So yeah. So today I'm gonna be talking about F1 a bit, and I like to make analogies just to make things a bit easier for my understanding. And I think F1's a great sport to do that with because it's a sport that embraces the cutting edge tech, which we all like in our industry. It's built on robust processes, and it consists of the most elite people in the industry fighting to win it. And so I think the first thing that we need to look at when we're looking at our high-performing team is where do we stand and where do we want to be? So in terms of F1, we can see there's a standard constructors leaderboard there with the top teams and those sitting below. And in the same vein, we should look at where do we situate ourselves in terms of the opposition that we can go up against in our high-performing blue team. Are we looking to compete against the APT Max Verstappen? Are we looking to go up against the Ferrari organized crime group? Or are we merely trying to take on those Williams and Alpine script kiddies that we're seeing? So I think now that we've understood where we are to an extent and where we maybe want to be going, we kind of need to break down how we're going to build our high-performing team into building blocks. And I think I'm going to use a fairly common model that's used, the 3-pillar model of technology, process, and people, which I've kind of alluded to before. And as such, let's dive right into our first pillar here. Right, so tech. This is always the sexy pillar. This is the pillar that we all love. We've got the latest and greatest tech coming out on our phones. We've got every new iPhone available, and we have to go stand in queues for hours and hours to get these things. And from an F1 perspective, tech plays an extremely important role. From the cars, every part that goes into that car has had hours and hours and hours of R&D, to the data and the millions of data points that they're collecting and able to make decisions on the go throughout the race and whatever the case may be. But ultimately, tech underpins where the sport is going. And I think in the same vein, cyber looks a lot like that. Christo had the fantastic talk earlier about how in the last 10 years we've seen a great improvement in the technology within cybersecurity. We're seeing unprecedented visibility. We're also able to respond much more quickly and more appropriately than we were many years ago. And we're seeing many new tech products come out that enhance and give us better automation, better ability to keep our companies secure. So then why are we concerned about the other two pillars at all? Why didn't we just put all our eggs into this basket, right? I mean, if we just go and spend all our money on tech, we should, in essence, be able to deal with those top-tier APTs. But we're not, clearly. And ultimately, I think that comes down to the fact that, while tech gives us an amazing advantage and a great starting point and allows us to at least compete with those script kiddies and those motivated individual levels, when we start getting to the more sophisticated tiers of opposition, they also have access to these tools and technologies. And what was alluded to in the previous talks as well is these threat actors are also taking the tools that we have and finding ways to bypass them. So just throwing down tons of tools out of the box and putting that in our environment and saying, cool, we're all good to go, is only going to ever keep us at a certain level of our high-performing team. Right, so just to talk a little bit around tech changes, and I want to mention Red Bull here as our analogy, because they spent 12 seasons, 12 years essentially, utilizing a Renault power unit, and then made the decision at some point, after a little bit of poor form, that they needed to switch it up. And so they switched to a Honda power unit, and have been with them from there, and are currently the #1 ranked team on the F1 leaderboard. They've now also recently made the decision to develop their own power units, and we'll see where that takes them. But the reason I wanted to bring this up was around tech and what I mentioned earlier around how, we've got the latest and greatest coming out. We've got these new keyword, all these cool new things like AI-driven and automation and fantastic bits and pieces coming out. But that doesn't mean that we should just up and throw in the newest tech every 6 months to a year that we start seeing it, right? If we're constantly just throwing in new tech or pulling out our old tech, putting in new stuff that has something slightly different and slightly new and slightly better, we're still only going to be sitting at that baseline that we spoke about earlier. And so let's not treat our tech like iPhones. And in light of that, I'll talk a little bit about the cockpit, or what I like to look at around fine-tuning. And so on the right, you can see that there's a Formula One driver's cockpit, essentially, as F1 steering wheel, that he can, on the fly, make minute changes and adapt to how he's dealing with what is going out there on the track. In the same vein, our SOC analysts, our responders, our threat hunters, they get access to our tools and our technology. And it's about what they can do with those tools that then allows them to really progress and utilize that technology to the best that it can be used. And ultimately then comes down to how do we go about fine-tuning our tech so that we can take ourselves from being at that baseline level to moving up this leaderboard and competing further up against these higher tier threats. All right, so we've got all the tech, we're happy with it, but we do still need to look at the two other pillars. So taking a turn, I want to talk a little bit about process. So with process, ultimately we're looking to achieve a goal, and we're looking to do it in the most efficient manner and to provide and improve our efficacy through this. Here you can see this is a Formula One pit stop. The ultimate goal of this being to get the race car in and out with whatever change needs to happen in the shortest amount of time. The current record for a Formula One pit stop is under 2 seconds. But the one thing you will note there is that there are 21 people involved in this pit stop, and each of those people is performing multiple processes, and that is just the pit stop. Now, we're not talking about race strategy, we're not talking about the driver on the track, we're not talking about the developers at the sort of factories. All in all, F1 is a sport built around robust processes, and I think the same can be considered for cybersecurity. We have many processes in place, from threat hunting to playbooks to alert engineering, and the list just goes on. And these are just the parts of it that I was very familiar with. I'm sure in your environments you see tons and tons of process, and they can be quite cumbersome. But ultimately they're there to help us build efficiency and help us achieve our goals in an effective manner. But the thing that I do want to mention here is that just like in F1, our environment is dynamic. And so we can't just develop processes, write out these beautiful documents with the decision trees and all these great things, put them into an online storage system and leave them there until the time comes. Ultimately, we need to look at how do we review these? How do we continuously revise our processes to ensure that they are keeping up with being as efficient and effective as possible, and allowing us to be the best that we can. And I think one thing to consider here as well, when I mention putting these things into a document library and not looking at them, is around testing processes. It's very important for us to not see the first time I ever have to see our response to a domain take back is when I pull out that document and have to then go and try and work out how I'm going to respond to that kind of process. So processes need to be reviewed and refined and tested continuously so that we're ensuring that we are keeping ourselves in the best possible form to be competing and working our way towards the top of that leaderboard. We do have some fantastic tools like things like SOAR and other automation that does take a lot of manual parts of the process away from the people having to perform them. Ultimately, we still have people that have to develop those and maintain them as well. But the point I'm getting to here, which will allow us to segue a little bit, is with all the processes in place, we still require ourselves to have the people behind them in order to develop, maintain, and perform these processes, right? So to hit the apex of our of our talk, I'm going to pivot on to people, which is ultimately where I've been trying to get to in our conversation today, because this is the pillar to us that is the most volatile pillar. In Formula One, you can see a team is made up of many, many people, and these people aren't always there all the time. You have new joiners, you have leavers, you have people changing jobs and changing roles, and it's obviously a very volatile pillar to have to deal with from our side. So then how does F1 kind of deal with these aspects? So for one, if we look at their drivers, they've got a very robust grassroots type of system where they've got from karting all the way through their driver academies into their junior drivers. They're preparing and they're building. And so if we look at it, should a driver leave or get poached or retire, we've got replacements readily available for them. And I think we can look at this in the same vein when it comes to cybersecurity. We have our teams made up of various roles. A lot of you here aren't core blue teamers and sit in various other teams. But ultimately, we are in a very volatile space where we do have levers happening all the time. We have new joiners coming. Each of them has their own experiences, their own core fundamental knowledge, and such. So ultimately, we need to ask ourselves, when it comes to cybersecurity and the people that we have in cybersecurity, we obviously understand that there is this massive skill shortage. I don't think anyone's sitting here saying there's no cybersecurity skill shortage. It's kind of a common key word. But then the question comes down to, what are we doing about the skill shortage in cybersecurity? And so if your recruitment program is to hire MWR consultants, I think that's always a great thing to go for. But ultimately, we need to consider, how do we develop these grassroots programs like they do in F1? How do we take the best of the best, the cream of the crop, so we're not just spending endless hours in recruitment interviews and sitting there and just hiring what we can. We really want to have the best, because that's the only way that we're going to get our high-performing team to the place that we can. Right, so in light of this, once we've got our great hiring programs up and we're getting these juniors coming through and they're all the best of the best and fantastic, they're obviously only sitting at a certain level, right? So I want to just talk quickly through two different aspects that I think are critical for your high-performing team, and those are knowledge and intuition. All right, so The first one I'll talk about is knowledge. And as you can see on the right, there is a somewhat average F1 driver, Lando Norris, doing his daily neck exercises. And so I think you can pretty much ignore everything on the left, because ultimately all you need to do is buy one of those mechanisms for your staff and ensure that they don't have any of those, chronic neck injuries from their jobs. No, so essentially, just how F1 drivers go through really intense training and they do a lot of repetition exercise and all these kind of things. Just the idea of how do you take your staff from the grassroots, from when you hire them through, and if you're hiring them in the middle of a semi-senior staff member or whatever the case may be, how do they get up to into context of where they are, what kind of tech you're using, the kind of processes you're backing, and those kind of things. So, obviously having these things like these robust progression pathways is a must-have in the organization. We're in an industry where you probably just this morning have learned quite a few new things about cybersecurity just based on the previous talks. And so how do we then focus that and hone that and teach our people the right things that they need to know at the time that they need to know it? And so developing these progression pathways and these training programs will greatly help you applying the core set of knowledge and principles that you need for your high-performing team. I want to talk a little bit about formal mentorship, because I think it is an important thing. It's something that I think has been informal in a lot of workplaces that I've been at. But since I've been at MWR, it's been quite a cool experience to be part of this formal mentorship program. And I know it's oftentimes implemented and discussed in some certain way or form, but ultimately at the end of the day, it is one of the best ways, I think, that you can do this kind of knowledge transfer and skills transfer from someone more senior to someone more junior, and have a trusted senior that you can come to and learn things from and build relationships with. So definitely something, if your team is positioned right, something to consider is formal mentorship. The third one on the list there is conferences. This one, whether it be going to conferences, spending $150,000 to get to Black Hat, or coming to something like this. I think allocating time for your team to go to conferences is very important, because it is where these new attacks are learned. It is where your blue team will really get to know the most modern attacks that are being put out there. And so even if you can't assign the time or the money for them to go to it, allocating time for them to watch. These things are often on YouTube, often on posts. So yeah, just thinking about how you can allow them time to attend or view these conferences so that they can keep up to date with the latest threats that are out there. One of the interesting things that I really got into when I was working at F&B actually was taking part in a Capture the Flag event called Boss of the SOC, Splunk Boss of the SOC. Very cool event that really taught us a lot and was really, really great and for our blue team and familiarizing ourselves with the tool, etc. And so I encourage you to look into Capture a Flag events, look into these online learning platforms, anything that can skill up your team and take them to that next level of being able to better perform attacks and defend against attacks, and even identify attacks should they encounter them. And then the last point on the list I just wanted to go through around training up knowledge is considering around how you work with your cybersecurity partners. And this isn't really a punt for MWR. It's just obviously all of you do in some way and form have a cybersecurity partner. And if I can just take an example of having pen testing performed, most oftentimes that's some external consultant, whether you even see them or not, performing a test, and you get delivered the report, and that's basically at the end of the day. And so I'd like to just consider why not, have some kind of debrief or time set aside with, if it's a basic pen test with your junior team members, where they can watch the pen testers reperform their actions, or even take them through these attacks and get them to familiarize and understand themselves with it. All right, so now that I've had my piece around knowledge, and I don't think I'm saying anything spanking new here, I just want to talk a little bit about something that I also think is fundamental, and this is more related to our top performing blue teamers, and that's around building intuition. And so I'm going to show you a little video on an F1, showing some good intuition here. Right. So yeah. So basically, I think that is a great example of intuition when it comes to F1. I think another great example of intuition is if you notice that was actually F2 and not F1. Um, so this is not instinct. This is not a primal thing that's happening here. This is someone that, sure, they may have this gut feeling, but this is built on data points. This is built on experience, and this is built on familiarity. And so this is what I'm trying to get to in you building a great blue teamer is having someone that has the experience and has the familiarity to identify that needle in the haystack, to be able to get that idea that just pops into their head randomly and they follow it down a completely random path or train and suddenly come up with a great eureka moment. So these are the kind of things that I think that we need to be looking at that gives our high-performing team the edge, allows them to act quickly and appropriately under pressure. Unfortunately, I don't think I've got the greatest solution for you that encompasses everything. But ultimately, because we're talking about experience here, there are scenarios such as red teaming, which are fantastic for training your people on being able to deal with these and familiarizing them with it. But also, if you do happen to have live incidents, why not bring your junior team members onto these live incidents? I know sometimes it's quite hard since they have to deal with a lot of the more mundane tasks, but giving them that experience and allowing them to experience and see what's going on and learn from their seniors will then put them in greater stead and allow them to better deal with the situation that comes at them like that when the time does come. All right, so I've spoken a lot about our 3 pillars and the fundamentals. Next up, we need to look at how we're going to prepare for our race. And so we basically need to take all 3 of these pillars, smoosh them all together, and we have our high-performing team. And this high-performing team now needs to be able to deal with the fish hook hairpin. They need to be able to manage those insider threat twists. Do we have the right technology in place and the processes to follow so that we can sort of beat our opposition on ransomware rush? And are our threat hunters using the tools appropriately? Have we fine-tuned them? Are we seeing what we need to see and able to capture those Trojans and Trojan turn? So a little bit of tongue-in-cheek slide there, but ultimately, when it comes to the race, essentially what I'm saying is, have we built up our high-performing team to be able to effectively deal with these different threats that come at us and win the day? Obviously, one race does not make a season, and so we need to, as a blue team, look at how do we continue this and continue the season. And so on the F1 leaderboard, we can see things like our Red Bulls being third a few seasons ago to now being first and making their way up. So they've really focused their high-performing teams into gaining seasonal gains. And the same can be said for a lot of our clients, actually. So we do have quite a bit of data from clients that we have built great partnerships with over the years. And we are actually seeing these things. The focus that our clients have on building up these 3 pillars have taken them from being able to merely sit and look at motivated individuals and not even being able to detect the highly capable groups to now being able to quite easily detect and respond to motivated individuals and be at a really good position to take on those groups and those organized crime sectors. So yeah, the last thing I would like to note around this is because we're looking at something that takes a long period of time, I think it's quite important to note that we can't get there in a day. We can't throw in the latest tech and somehow magically get a consultant to come in and create 1,000 processes and then hire all the MWR staff, and then we've got this amazing blue team. That's not how it works. Ultimately, we're looking at a season-by-season gain, and I think the most important part to take out of that is to celebrate the gains that we do make, celebrate the improvements that we make. We're not always going to win, and there's always going to be a more advanced threat actor out there, but the progress that we make should be celebrated. All right, and so for my super quick, super racy talk, the summary takeaways that we've got, I think the first thing I'd just like to note, whether you be in a blue team or not in a blue team, or whatever the case may be, you work in cybersecurity, you work in an industry that is currently really hot, but also requires a lot of expertise, and you're going up against some of the most advanced threat actors that we've seen to date. And so if we're just sitting there considering our blue team as any regular day-to-day job, I think we're looking at it wrong, and we need to start looking at how we can better ourselves and be the best high-performing team that we can. Just to look at our people, think about what we can do for these grassroots programs. How can we pressure the financial people within our business to assist us with developing grassroots programs, these grad programs, looking into schools, those kind of things. Have we got the right progression pathways in place? Have we built up our cybersecurity knowledge base so that when new joiners come on, they've got the appropriate information available to them to be able to upskill themselves? And lastly, around the people, is to develop and hone the intuition in your blue teamers, because that ultimately will be what takes you to the next level. And then lastly, just to reconclude around the season, it is an incremental journey. It is something that takes time. It's not a once-off event, and the most important thing for you is to celebrate those. Don't get bogged down in the tasks and completing tasks and tasks and tasks. Celebrate the improvements that you have. Celebrate when you detect the red team. Celebrate when you can kick someone off your network. Enjoy those moments. And that concludes my talk.